Everyone, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, good evening. Mark Allegro's not here today. Welcome to We the People of Cape Cod. We're honored to have Andrew Beckwith as our speaker this evening to talk about the First Amendment, the importance of it, why our founding fathers put that first on the Bill of Rights. And Andrew is from the Massachusetts Family Institute. It is an organization that was grew out of Focus on the Family, which is a ministry out of Colorado, probably close to 30 years ago. The Focus on the Family noticed that our freedoms were being eroded through legislative measures in states all across the country. So they recommended each state set up an organization to be sort of the watchdog in that state for anti-family literature legislation. And Mass Family Institute is the organization that was developed here in Massachusetts. Andrew Beckwith graduated from the University of Minnesota Law School. He was in the Marine Corps and served as a judge advocate in the Marine Corps. And he was also on Homeland Security as an immigration attorney in Boston. He has been the president of Mass Family Institute for how many years?
5 years as president, for a total of 7 years. I got the reminder a week ago on LinkedIn. It's my 7-year anniversary. So
wow. Okay. He's also been married for 20 years and is the father of 4. He grew up and continues to live on the North Shore. So welcome, Andrew Beckwith.
I'm a North Shore guy, so thanks for having me down here on the South Shore, which is, there's vast swaths of Minnesota I'm more familiar with than the South Shore of my own state. 93 is so bad, but wasn't too bad today. It's pretty dry, so happy to be here. And I've spoken at a lot of places, churches all over the Commonwealth, sometimes ballrooms up the state house. I've never spoken in a firehouse before. So it's a great facility. So I'm a lawyer. I went to law school, took some classes in the First Amendment. I don't know that I'm qualified to speak on it from a professorial perspective. That may not be as interesting anyways as what I'm hoping to do, which is just kind of talk you through some of the various kind of fights I found myself engaged in that revolve around the First Amendment, particularly freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and how that's affecting all of our lives and families and communities. Probably one of the best examples, one of the most comprehensive examples in some ways, is what happened at Gordon College, which is my alma mater. I went to school at Gordon College. It's up in Wenham, again on the North Shore, small Christian liberal arts school. And a couple of years ago, there was this kerfuffle in the media I saw about Gordon, that the president of Gordon College had written a letter to the Obama administration. This is probably 2014-ish, requesting an exemption from some new federal regulation that would require schools that receive funding to have this LGBT anti-discrimination language and policies, which is a problem for a lot of Christian schools because they have a statement of faith and a behavioral policy that prevents someone who's not living sort of God's plan for human sexuality to be hired as faculty or staff. Pretty standard stuff until kind of recently. So he had just written this letter. I think he's one of the signers of a letter. A bunch of Christian institutions have signed this and sent it to the Obama administration in kind of standard exercise of the First Amendment freedom to petition the government, right? There's 5 freedoms in the First Amendment: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom to petition the government, and freedom of assembly. And so here he is petitioning the government, and using his free speech to publicize that, although he didn't make a big deal out of it. But the media kind of went crazy that this was a really homophobic, horrible thing to do. How could he sign that letter? And eventually, the Boston Globe was writing articles about it. The mayor of Salem cut ties with Gordon. They had done a historical project. They got a Cry Innocent, which is a theatrical production in Salem about the Salem witch trials. And so Gordon students have been involved with that. And so Salem cut ties with Gordon because of this. And then the city of Lynn, I don't know if anyone knows about the North Shore. So the city of Lynn, a lot of sort of underprivileged youth go to school there and were ministered to very practical ways by Gordon students who were student teachers. And so you had Gordon student teachers getting their accreditation hours in the Lynn school system. And the Lynn School District voted to, again, cut ties with Gordon, not accept any more Gordon students as student teachers because of this letter and the policy that it essentially, I guess, highlighted that Gordon requires students and faculty, and I've been both, to sign a statement of faith and a behavioral policy, life and conduct policy, it's called. I mean, look, Gordon College is a small Christian school. When my grandfather went there, it was a Bible college, mostly for missionaries. If you want to smoke, drink, and screw around, Salem State's right up the street. That's not what Gordon College is about. It's an intentional community of faith. But that was not okay. And so, unfortunately, you had these Lynn kids and the Gordon students both missing out. And in fact, there had been a plan to bring students from Lynn, again, underprivileged students, to come and spend a day at the college campus, which is a beautiful campus up there on the North Shore, to say, look, this is what college looks like, and if you work hard at school, maybe you can come here someday or come to a place like this, and that got cut off as well. So a very tragic episode and a terrifying one for Christian educators everywhere, that by just having the same policies that were in place, in the 1990s when I went there, and changed anything, those are no longer accepted to sort of our culture at large. Now, why did I bring that up about the First Amendment? So not only did the president of the school exercise his First Amendment right to petition the government, and you can say his First Amendment right to free speech to talk about it, he was also petitioning the government and talking about it to defend the First Amendment right of freedom of assembly, in the sense that this is an intentional community of faith. So you get to decide who you're going to interact with in a private institution like this. And obviously the freedom of religion. And in order to live that faith out in community, you have to be able to preserve that freedom. And then the freedom of the press is what everybody else used to just beat them down about it. So in that scenario, you had really all five freedoms, for better or for worse, being exercised by various parties. Now, interestingly, one area where freedom was being violated, First Amendment freedom, freedom from religious discrimination, was ironically the Lynn School Committee. When they voted to no longer accept Gordon students, right, so to treat Gordon College student teachers different than all the other student teachers because of the religious beliefs of that institution that these students went to. That is crystal clear violation of the rights of Gordon College and religious discrimination. Now, they wanted to be good neighbors and didn't pursue that legally. I kind of wish they had. It would have been a very clear-cut case. And that's, you probably all know, with the First Amendment and questions of violating someone's right to free speech or right to freedom of religion, private parties don't do that. The state does that, right? The First Amendment is sort of a restraint against the state, whether that's the Lynn School Committee or the federal government or anything in between. So another incident which I was going to be the attorney, ended up getting resolved. So I was kind of disappointed about that, but it was a good resolution. Was at Bunker Hill College. I don't know if anyone saw this headline a couple of years ago. There was a student who was a Navy veteran, and he's at Bunker Hill College, and he's a big fan of the Constitution. Part of a group called Young Americans for Liberty, and part of sort of his outreach to fellow students was to educate them on the Constitution, something I think this group would be in favor of. So he would walk around and hand out pocket constitutions. Okay, great, right? Except that he did it without getting prior approval and a permit from the school. And in order to get prior approval and a permit, he would have to be part of a specifically school recognized organization. And so there was, again, being a Navy vet who fought for, risked his life for our Constitution and wanting to educate his classmates about it, he went ahead and kept passing them out. And so there's actually a video of him on campus asking the campus police officer, would you like a copy of the Constitution? And the officer says, look, you've got to have a permit, you really can't be doing that. I mean, you can tell that the police officer doesn't want to be doing this. He's enforcing a policy that even he knows just intuitively is not a good idea. And so that, again, this Navy vet student very politely, sir, would you like a copy of the Constitution? And so there's, that goes on for several minutes, and it's great because the Zakin Bridge is in the background. So everybody knows, right, because when you drive to Boston, you drive over the bridge, if you're coming from the north, if you're going north, I mean, you know that school is right there, Bunker Hill Community College. So you know this is happening on Bunker Hill, which is a bit ironic, given the significance of that location. Now, the good news is we've got Alliance Defending Freedom involved, which is a national Christian sort of legal ministry that does a lot of work on the First Amendment. They got involved, and emails started going back and forth with the administration, and they resolved things, and they sort of dropped their school charges against the student and allowed him to pass out his Constitution. But that just shows if you don't stand up for these rights, they can evaporate. Because there's a real, I think some of it is intentional, obviously. Some of it's just ignorance. We deal with high school students who want to start a Bible club, and they want to be treated like every other club, have the right to a space to meet, to have a teacher sort of supervisor, be an official club, to hang notices on the school bulletin boards, and they're constantly getting pushback. We have one high school student, it's in the Lincoln Sudbury School District. They had a new, beginning of the year club and activity fair, all different kinds of organizations. And she and her friend had this big table, lots of candy and treats, and they were going to do a function of Christian athletes Bible study. And she had not only students coming over and kind of saying, we're doing that for last time, you can't do that, but teachers saying, well, you can't bring your Bible to school. And administrators pushing back. And I think a lot of times people just don't know what the law actually is on this stuff. And for example, can anyone tell me where in the Constitution the term separation of church and state is? What section of the Constitution?
It's not there.
Right. But most people don't know that. Even public school administrators, believe it or not. There's a PR specialist in Alliance Defending Freedom who has said, and cited that as an example of, if you repeat something enough, people assume it's true, right? That the Constitution has been effectively amended in people's minds by the repetition of that phrase, separation of church and state, which is not in the Constitution. But that, I think, in some ways accounts for the sort of knee-jerk reaction of school teachers and administrators oftentimes, that anything to do with religion just can't happen in school, which is not the case. You can't have school teachers leading the Bible study. Students absolutely have the right to bring their Bible to school and to read it, and to have a club that's treated just like every other club. In fact, if they get treated differently than any other club, that is religious discrimination by the entity of the state, the school, against the student. So those are the best phone calls I get, because that's an easy fix. You send an email or letter to the administrator. It's like, oh, this is from a lawyer. They give it to their lawyer, who says, yeah, you can't screw it against that. And that's an easy fix. Everybody wins, and the kids are happy. So we have several instances of those going on, including in the Lynn School District. So they're now over 2 on this stuff. But that's important. I mean, now more than ever, there's so much brokenness in the public school system. I think kids are really hungering for the truth. And so if they can get that from a classmate, and share the word of God with them. I mean, that's religious freedom. Right? Regardless of how you feel about Christianity, that's religious freedom for young people can live out that First Amendment. Another major case. Anyone Catholic here? Sorry.
Catholic
Yeah.
person?
Yes.
Didn't Bill Clinton many years ago proposed and I guess passed the legislation or whatever that said that if you want to have a separate space in the school to pray,
Yeah.
you can do it.
I believe so. I remember whether it was early on in one of the Bible club situations I was working on, I remember looking up some kind of, maybe it was a Department of Education memo or something that was on point, but it was from the Clinton administration.
Right.
And I was kind of, surprised. I was like, look, even he gets it back then.
Oh yeah, but then it seemed like, well, the story I heard, it seemed like it backfired because the only people who were taking advantage of that was the Muslims.
Yeah. So
the Muslim kids could, they could go there anytime they wanted. There was no such time. They wanted to get out of gym class. Sure. They could just go there. But it just seems funny that if that is the case,
yeah.
then, being able to get a club in the school or after school or something would be like, no brainer.
Well, it is, and shame on us for not having more Bible clubs. We have a constitutional right to it, and if anyone wants to start one, or has kids or grandkids who want to start one, and they get the pushback, please give me a call. I love those phone calls because I can actually help. There's a lot of phone calls I get where I can't help given the current tenor of things here. Now, sort of along the same lines, there was a pastor who came to my office a few years ago. And he was looking to do a church plant. There's actually a lot of church plants, especially in the Boston area. A surprising number of new churches. And, it's tough to find real estate you can rent for 1 day a week economically, right, at all. So what a lot of pastors will do if they can is they'll find a public school that they can rent on Sunday mornings, and they go use the auditorium or the gym. They do the church service there, and then they'll often do service projects. They paint all the lockers or sweep up the grounds or something. It's usually a very mutually beneficial arrangement. But this one pastor was being told by a school district that, sorry, we don't rent to churches. I said, really? Did they say that in writing? Well, no, it's just over the phone, but they said it was their facility use policy. Okay. So I Googled, I looked up the school district, and there's the facility use policy. Usually this stuff isn't in writing, so this is great. Right there, in black and white, facility use policy, religious worship services are not appropriate usage for the school. Yes. That's my job really is. And you can't do it. You can't say you're going to rent a space and like basketball tournaments, the math club, theater production, art show, but no religious worship services. Again, you're discriminating on the basis of religion. And your state can't do it. So we got that fixed. And now he's at a different school district because that could, by the time we get back to him, he found another location. But his church is accepted 3 services now. He's running out of space. And it's a real diverse group, international. So it's an incredible ministry. It makes sense to have schools host these pastors, but again, oftentimes they just think that they can because it's religious. So I was asked a moment ago, how many here are Catholic or have gone to Catholic schools? Okay. So Fontbonne Academy is in Milton, Massachusetts, founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph. So this is a really interesting case when we talk about sort of freedom of religion side of things. So Fontbonne Academy is an all-girls school, Catholic school, and they needed a new food services director. So they got applications. They found a guy who's really highly qualified. They were getting ready to hire him, and his name's Barrett, Michael Barrett. When he was filling out the final paperwork for insurance and whatnot, he listed his husband as his emergency point of contact. So someone at Fontbonne saw that and said, we're a Catholic school, and so we have certain beliefs and required everyone follow those beliefs, because we're, a potential Catholic school. We're sorry, we can't hire you. So he sues. Now there is a provision in Massachusetts law that specifically allows religious organizations to be exempt from some of the non-discrimination hiring requirements. Right? So you can say we're only going to hire someone who's Catholic because we're a Catholic organization, or we're going to hire someone who lives consistently with the teachings of the church. But that exemption, and if you look historically, that exemption was added to the law in 1989 as part of a broader piece of legislation, which added the term sexual orientation to the state's list of protected categories for non-discrimination. So, in '89, I was running around public school in like 7th grade or something. But I got to imagine that the deal was, on Beacon Hill, okay, look, we'll add sexual orientation, but, St. Mary's or whatever should be able to hire who they want, not have to force to hire someone that's contrary to the faith, right? That's the deal, okay, fine. But it had never been challenged in court. That exemption for those organizations had never been litigated until the Fontaine case, which was 2013, 14-ish. And so you had this one judge who looked at it, kind of picked at the wording, which was a little inconsistent in one area with another section, and basically came to the conclusion that Fontaine Academy did not qualify for that exemption because it wasn't a religious organization. So a Catholic all-girls school founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph, not a religious organization under Massachusetts law. And part of the reason, again, is because the wording was maybe not great, but the intent has got to be crystal clear, the legislative intent. But the judge got to the decision he wanted to get to. That was all. And so now, basically, in order to make sure that you qualify for that exemption as a religious organization, so that you can exercise the freedom of assembly and freedom of religion in your hiring and in your shaping of that intentional community, you have to only allow Catholics, or only allow your and it's not even clear whether you can do sort of broadly Christian, but there, on the issues of human sexuality, there are Christian churches that take a different option. So for now, there are Catholic institutions that are saying, with some legal justification, we can only accept Catholics. Because if we accept anyone, like, my family and I were Protestants, so if they accept my kids, now they've opened themselves up to everything. And they can't police it at all. They forfeit their rights under that section of the law. Which ironically makes the institution have to be sort of less tolerant and open and diverse. But that's where the law finds us. Now, I think that was an intentional, that legal setup was really too good to have just occurred. I don't know, I can't prove anything, but if you look at the federal constitutional decisions on that type of hiring question, there's the ministerial exception, sort of where the law is right now. But look, churches, religious organizations have a fundamental right to decide who is going to be their ministers. And so they can, quote unquote, discriminate and only hire who they want, because we value freedom of religion. And what is more sort of sacred or important to a church than who is the leader, the spiritual leader of that church? And that would also include teachers in a religious school. But the Supreme Court has not defined sort of how far that tent extends of protection. And something like food services director is clearly kind of right on the periphery, right? And so then the next step will be a gym teacher, and maybe a music teacher. And they just kind of close that circle of freedom and protection for the religious organization. And we saw within probably 6 months of that decision, there's a lawsuit filed against, again, Gordon College. On a related issue, I think it was, I'm trying to think of the exact the facts in this case. They hadn't promoted someone because of her advocacy for LGBT things, I think, something like that. But what was interesting to me was that the complaint has essentially taken the decision from the Fontaine case and taken the same language and made that into the complaint against Gordon. So they're trying to take this win here and use that as a battering ram against another religious school. So there's definitely some coordination there. Now, one area where, we're getting into, well, I've spent a lot of time dealing with the transgender issue for the past couple of years. And it does have some interesting First Amendment implications on a variety of perspectives. One being an area of speech that the government in general is allowed to police or restrict, which is commercial speech. Right? You can't make sort of false claims about your product. That's not that free speech is not a defense on that. And I just saw, I think you remember Chris Mino, their predecessor, retired Air Force fighter pilot. He's living down in Tulsa, Oklahoma now. He's telling me he's the rhinestone and the buckle of the Bible Belt. Well deserved. Well deserved. God bless him. He sent me an article. So, Planet Fitness. There was a woman who was a Planet Fitness member out in Michigan. I think her first name was Yvette. And she, was going to the gym, working out, and she sees there's a guy in the women's room. And so she complains, and they say, well, she identifies as female, so she has a right to be in there. She's like, well, yeah, but he's a guy. Complete, intact male. Okay. She identifies as female, or, opening and affirming, whatever. And so then the woman Yvette went and sort of told all her friends and neighbors and they've been going on social media, look, you should know there is a guy in the women's locker room changing and stuff. And so they terminated her membership because she's harassing this person. So she has sued, and I just saw that I think it's the Michigan Supreme Court had Planet Fitness had tried to get the case dismissed, and the Michigan Supreme Court said no, they have a case. And so what she's claiming now is, look, this is false advertising. Right? It says labeled women's locker room, but you're letting guys in there. And you put that in the fine print. There's no signs here that say the women's room, caution, men may be inside or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's interesting.
Yes.
Because she wins that will really take some of the wind out of the sails on this transgender movement, particularly public accommodations. And it does get down to this sort of ontological question: what does it mean to be female or male? What does the word woman mean? Can it mean a person with an X chromosome and a Y chromosome and intact male genitalia? According to a lot of people, the answer is yes. That's why they use this, but that's why they use the term gender instead of sex, right? Sex, biological, binary, chromosomes, anatomy, sex. Gender, when you think back to when you study foreign languages in high school, right? Words have gender. Like, does anyone speak Spanish?
Whatever language.
Or whatever language. Like, what is the gender of a chair in Spanish or French? In English, we don't have that really, but other languages they do. And there's a reason why the folks who are pushing transgenderism use the term gender and not sex, right? They don't say transsexual, transgender or gender identity. Because just like in a language, there's nothing inherently male or female about a chair. It is sort of arbitrarily assigned, right? Maybe based on how the chair feels. I'm not sure. but that's the mentality they're going with, the ethos they're trying to conjure up with the term gender identity, because they'll say your gender identity may be different than your sex assigned at birth. So this idea of assigning sex or gender, they're trying to meld the two words in place to obfuscate things. But legally, sex still has a legal definition. So it'll be interesting to see if they can win that case. And I just had some other parents I was talking to who, their kids go to a small girls camp, and the camp is now changing their policy to include boys who identify as girls, but just advertise themselves as a small girls camp. And it's like, what can we do? And well, we're trying to think if the camp wanted to prevent that from happening, That would be one thing, just sort of practically speaking on, we can defend them legally this way. But if the camp's all in, how do you stop them? I don't know. But then I saw this headline about the Truth in Advertising, the commercial speech lawsuit. So that'll be interesting. We'll see where that takes us. Going back to public schools, and I get parents occasionally will call me and say, they're telling my kid that he can't call Joey, who's been his friend since kindergarten. Now Joey's in 6th grade and she's Josephine. He's calling himself Josephina or Jill, and telling my kid that he has to call this other kid that's been a boy, that's always a boy, now by a female name, female pronoun. And can't refer to him by the name that is still on his desk. That's an interesting area, because does the state have the power to tell a student that they cannot call one of their classmates by a certain name or use certain pronouns? I don't know. If I had to guess, just on a practical level, not the should or the ought, but kind of where we are, they could probably justify it by saying, look, the psychological and emotional damage done to the student if they're called by a name that's going to be deeply offensive to them because it conjures up their old sex, or however they want to frame that. And this is how they're able to push a lot of this stuff through. Basically, you have to do what we tell you to do, or some transgender youth is going to kill themselves, and it'll be your fault. And it's essentially it's the jackhammer using this stuff, and it's born out of very real tragedy. I mean, so many of these children really are suffering, but they've got the causation backwards. So probably, the school, if a kid keeps using a name or even pronouns that are unwanted, that could be seen as harassment. If I had to guess which way it would go. However, on the alternative, and this may seem like a fine line, but it's something. I don't think they can make the kid use the preferred pronouns. So it's almost kind of detente, right? You can't call him what he is, but you don't have to call him what he wants to be, because that's compelled speech. Yes, ma'am.
It reminds me back to, I went to Catholic grade school, and I didn't want her to call me Miss Cates. I wanted her to call me Amy, but she called me Miss Cates. And so, and think of the kids in my class that the other kids called them Butthead or something, and they didn't want to be called Butthead, but they were a Butthead, right? And so it's like the tail's wagging the dog here.
Yeah.
And my concern isn't grade school, because now I laugh about that. She was going to call me Miss Cates no matter what I wanted, but the Olympics and women athletes competing against male athletes. I mean, that's obscene.
Yes, it is.
That's obscene. So the best track stars in some high schools, the best girl track stars, are now losing to boys who identify as girls. So it doesn't take rocket science for these boys to say, I'm going to lose against the boys. Why didn't I race against the girls? Duh. That's a great idea.
And the barrier to entry is really low. You don't have to have hormone surgery.
Right.
You have to dress. Just if you under Massachusetts law, the definition of gender identity, it really boils down to your sincerely held identity. That's it. Some kind of circular definition is what we get. But if you feel like a man, if I feel like a woman on the inside, and I declare that, that's it. Legally, I am a woman.
And maybe in school, maybe in bathrooms, but sports, competition, Olympics, the world.
Right, and that is why even having the legal right to not use the pronouns they want you to use is significant, because what we've seen is that if there's any firewall to this, right? Even the bathrooms, they have to get into the bathrooms, because if there's any area where we say, okay, fine, yep, all right, but for real, we know you're a guy. at any point, right, through sports, bathrooms, whatever, then the whole kind of charade falls apart.
Right.
And so that's why they're just trying to break through all of those barriers. But I think they're a pretty good case, pretty good law on the compelled speech situation. I remember when I was in elementary school, there was a classmate who was a Jehovah's Witness. So he didn't stand up and do the Pledge of Allegiance. And he had a constitutional right not to. So if we can't make kids say the Pledge of Allegiance, there's no way they're making my kid call a male classmate female or vice versa.
Yeah, a few years ago, the Justina Pelletier case made national headlines. And when there were two different medical facilities making diagnoses and a treatment plan, and the parents chose one option, and the doctor pushing the other option had DCF remove her from their home, and the state took over. Do you have any concerns, because now they give puberty blockers and hormone therapy to children? If you have a child that insists they're the opposite gender, and you have parents that don't agree with the medical treatment for this, do you see a case down the road where children will be taken away so that the state can make sure that they get these?
I've seen it. It's happened. It's already happened. And the child hasn't get taken away in this case, but there's a case in Ohio, not Massachusetts, Ohio, where they just, I think today, signed a heartbeat abortion ban. So they put 6 to 8 weeks, no more abortions. There's a heartbeat. It's great. It's Ohio. That's the same state though that had Cincinnati Children's Hospital pushing for the 17-year-old girl to have puberty blockers, and the parents, Catholic couples, no, we'd like to get her counseling. She had some issues, but we don't want to make her chemically sterile, right? It's not, and the state took custody away because it was medically necessary. Now that same case, almost identical, happened here in Massachusetts, up on the North Shore. Praise God that the judge decided not to require. She basically said no puberty blockers until the child's 18.
No what?
No puberty blockers, which is sort of right.
Yeah.
You socially transition, then you do puberty blockers, then you do cross-sex hormones, then you do surgery. That's kind of the regimen. And I just saw, there's an article in the New Boston Post. If you don't look at the New Boston Post, you really should. It's a conservative online news site. The editor's great. He does all the stories that the Boston Globe doesn't want to talk about. There was an article I think on Monday about some new legislation that will establish a committee not a committee, it's even worse than a committee, establish a commission to go through kind of DCF regulations and policies on LGBT youth. And I think that was where they were talking about a study, or maybe it was a different case I was reading. Get a little confused and stuff, but there's at least one study where they're trying to find out what the impact of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones are on kids as young as 8. So, general, typically it's puberty blockers, 12 to 16, cross-sex hormones, and double elective mastectomy for women. And if we're going to talk about the trans stuff, my introduction to that whole topic was, I remember the Robert Michel Kozilek case. So Robert Kozilek, very troubled man, strangled his wife with piano wire, life in prison. But he identifies as female, so he wants to have the surgery and go to the women's prison. And even under the Deval Patrick administration, they fought that. But there was a federal judge, Judge Wolf, I think is since retired, who said, no, he has a constitutional right under the 8th Amendment, right, freedom from cruel and unusual punishment, which to me is a little ironic that cruel and unusual punishment is to not have your manhood cut off. He said he had a right to it. The state needed to fund it and do it. So I wrote an amici brief, so front of the court brief, because that stuff is going to sway the court. But just to kind of go on record, like, look, this is not a violation of constitutional rights, and there's good reasons for the Department of Corrections not to go along with this stuff. But in researching that, I got to read the testimony and some of the evidence in this original hearings on this issue. And it's really sad because his youth was horrific. The amount of abuse, sexual and physical abuse he suffered at the hands of a grandfather, either a father and uncle. Some of the initial counselors he went to developed a relationship with him sexually, just awful stuff. Doesn't excuse what he did. But it said that when he looks at his own body, his male genitalia, he sees the instrument of his own torture. And that's why it gives him so much anxiety that he's suicidal and wants to cut it off himself. Which makes it sort of, I can understand how someone who's gone through that much trauma would have that kind of reaction. I don't think that's the right answer. But it just sort of demonstrated for me that in order to get to that place, at least for some people, there's an awful lot of brokenness that brought him there. But he needs healing, you need to heal the inside. The body was healthy, but the mind and the spirit certainly not. There's a second issue on that. So, all right. So I talked about the mom and the daughter. If you did not lose custody, but we're going to see that case again. And even in that case, they were saying it was medically necessary to get puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, which medically necessary is kind of trigger language in the legal realm. It's medically necessary, and you deny it as a parent. It's kind of like saying your child has cancer, they need chemotherapy, and you deny it. So that's scary as a parent, because once we get to the point where we say if a child identifies or has been identified by some third party, maybe, you hear kids say this, he's gay, just doesn't know it yet. Okay, so how does that work? Or I get phone calls from parents where it's one child who has a new group of friends and they're very pro-LGBT, and their best friend is pansexual, and his friend is convincing the daughter. I think his name is Ray.
What is pansexual?
That's a good question. These are all made up terms, and they're constantly changing and increasing in number. In general, pansexual is someone who's sexually attracted to every type of permutation out there. But beyond, so there's bisexual, but that's kind of limiting because it's bi, right? So you're attracted to male and female. Pansexual, probably attracted to men who identify as women and men who identify as men, women who identify as women, who identify as men.
Sheep
But
who
not
identify as dogs.
How do you get to
Well, I'll tell you how we get to animals. We did that in law school at the University of Minnesota, which was renamed Walter Mondale Hall while I was there. So I'll tell you something about it, which is kind of ironic because Walter Mondale, I don't think it was coordinated, it just worked out that Paul Wellstone, who was the sitting senator, died in a tragic plane crash during that campaign in 2002. So they kind of dragged Mondale out to run for that seat, which he lost. So he lost, I think, 49 states out of 50 in the presidential election against Reagan in '84, and then lost Minnesota in 2002 for the 50th. But I think it was my senior year, we had a class called Human Sexuality in the Law. And it was taught by a guy who was open homosexual, and so he was kind of promoting this agenda. But he said when we started out, okay, in order to have the discussions in this class, you can't bring in morality or tradition or the Bible or religion or anything like that. And I was kind of still a young law school student, and I should have pushed back a lot harder on that than I did. But he said, the basis for what can or can't be criminalized when it comes to sexual behavior is two consenting adults. Which, frankly, if you asked, even back in 2002, just pull someone off the sidewalk, hey, should two consenting adults be allowed to do whatever they want to do? Most people are going to say yes. Now, right out of the gate, what does two consenting adults get you? Sure, same-sex relationships. It also gets you incest. That's not for adults, right? So there was, and when the class figured out, there's an ick factor, but they were comforted by the fact that the only reason we have these prohibitions against incest are because the, higher rates of genetic mutation in the offspring. But look, we've got comprehensive contraception and abortion, so we can neutralize that problem. Okay, they're adults. Okay, that's fine. But then why two? Right? It's kind of arbitrary. Some cultures have polygamy or polyandry, so multiple wives, multiple husbands, or just sort of a large group. It's just kind of arbitrary. Which really, we're just talking about consenting adults, right? As long as they're consenting, okay, fine. So what does it mean? What's an adult, though? What's an adult? It's 14 to work, 16 to drive, 18 to vote, 21 to drink, 25 to rent a car. What's an adult? Kind of all arbitrary ages and across cultures and different places and times. Ages of consent have been different. So really, we're just talking about consent, right? We have adult means we don't want people who are incapable of giving consent having sex. So really, we're just talking about consent. And it was the consent factor that kept us as a class from sort of embracing bestiality, because you couldn't guarantee the consent of the animal with the current language barriers. I'm serious. This is a top 20 law school. People in this class have gone on to be judges, attorneys, the editor of the law reviews in this class. So it was about a dozen of us. Everybody was on board with all this stuff, except for me and the Mormon kid that sat across from me. And that was in 2000, well, it actually might have been spring 2003. It was when sodomy still on the books as a crime in Texas. So, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I have this job, is I've seen where we're going. It's played out and fast forward in my law school class. But the parental rights stuff, that's the real scare. And so this sort of recent battle that we've lost for the moment on the counseling ban, again, has really strong First Amendment implications. I was reading this brief, a similar case out of Florida. So if you're not familiar with the counseling ban, essentially it says it will be, you'll lose your license, you're not permitted, it's a crime to, for a licensed mental health professional to give any type of treatment or therapy to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, that therapy could include talk therapy, which is the only way that I know anyone who actually does this, is just through talk counseling with someone who wants help dealing with unwanted same-sex desires or gender identity confusion. That is now, as of Monday night, thanks to Charlie Baker, against the law. And I've already talked to a counselor trying to connect her with a family who's got a 15-year-old daughter who's struggling with gender confusion. Like 2 weeks ago, she decided she was a boy. Now she's asking her dad, will you let me take the T? And we're not talking about the blue line. We're talking about testosterone.
Oh.
15. So, and I talked to this counselor, a Christian counselor, and I know it would be great, wonderful woman, and she said, I just don't, with this new law, I don't feel comfortable engaging in that kind of thing. I lose my license.
Could you explain
Yeah.
it again?
Yeah.
So that any licensed
health professional in Massachusetts may not engage in sexual orientation or gender identity change efforts, which is a new legal term under Massachusetts law. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, it means seeking to impose any change in sexual orientation or behavior or expression, excuse me, or gender identity or expression. Now, that's significant because people debate whether or not you can change someone's sexual orientation. Right? Like Lady Gaga says, we're born that way. Now, I am not aware of any hard scientific evidence that people are born with a set sexual orientation. But even if that were true, and that's unchangeable, right? Someone is always going to have certain desires no matter what type of treatment they get. Some people argue that's the case. We're fine, but we're all accountable for our actions. We can all change our behaviors. Really, that's what we're talking about. And I was on the a podcast that's coming out tomorrow. I hope it's not too crazy. It's with Kurt Minahan, who is a sportscaster or a sports talk radio guy. He's now branched out to other topics on this podcast. And so we're doing an interview, and he's asking me a lot of questions. But he asked me he's not talking about counseling then. And he was asking, what would I do if one of my sons came home and said, Dad, I'm gay? And I said, well, we're a family that believes in God's word, and that's primary importance. So I talked to him about, okay, so you have these feelings. Well, what are we going to do with those feelings? He's like, yeah, but don't you want him to get married and be totally and perfectly 100% fulfilled sexually? I said, Kurt, are you 100% fulfilled sexually? And he was on. But seriously, right? Like what? And I wish I had friends of mine say, look, as a father of a teenage boy, what father of a teenage boy wants their teenage boy to be 100% fulfilled sexually? Right? That's not. So, where was I going with this? But the idea that behaviors can certainly be changed. And so this law would prevent, even if someone came in and said, look, I'm attracted to other guys, but I want to get married. I want my children. I want to have children with a woman, and I want my children to have a mother and a father. And I'm willing to sacrifice my own desires. I'm willing to sacrifice, my sexual fulfillment, because this is my vision for family and for my future. And can you help me, towards that? That's now illegal in Massachusetts. And we had a guy named Ken Williams from California. He's part of a group called changedmovement.com. Changemovement.com. He shows up in a black T-shirt with the word "changed" on it, in white, with several of his compatriots. They testify at the State House, and they told their personal stories. And his story was, he was a teenager. He suffered some abuse when he was younger. He was attracted to men. He wanted to get married and have kids with a woman, the old-fashioned. He got counseling at the age of 17 to help him do that. He's now married with 4 beautiful kids. And I honestly don't know. If, in his case, if he still has any same-sex attractions or not. Frankly, that's between him and God. But his behavior is what he wanted, and he got help to be that way. And now, interestingly, this kind of goes back to the free speech aspect. He told his story. Very sweet guy. Not confrontational at all. Told his story at the hearing. And one of the legislators who was sponsoring this bill, who's married to another man, so a homosexual man, kind of pushed back and said, I look around this room and I'm really concerned about the LGBT youth who are in this room today that have to listen to what you're saying. So basically, Ken's personal story of subjugating his sexual desires to his higher vision and goals for life, that's dangerous for LGBT. Now, what are the implications politically for free speech if that's what's driving the train with these guys? Because in reality, Ken's existence is a challenge to this legislator's life choices. Because if they both had the same sexual desires, but Ken was able to get married and have kids, why couldn't this legislator? I think that's sort of the implicit challenge to this guy that just made him viscerally angry. But he's going to couch it as, this is dangerous for LGBT youth to hear. It's dangerous for them to hear that they can subjugate their sexual desires to something higher. Good God, that is a message that every teenager needs to hear, and a lot of adults too. But it's one that's being crushed in the name of tolerance and anti-bullying. Any questions? How much time do I have? I'm just been rambling.
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Bill S-70, which is the essence of what Governor Baker just signed.
Yes, with one notable exception, but
Took out the child abuse clause as far as speech. So I'm going to read it because you'll now know what it's about. Sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts, a practice by a healthcare provider that attempts or purports to impose change of an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity, including, but not limited to, efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions or feelings towards individuals of the same sex Provided, however, that sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts shall not include practices that provide acceptance, support, and understanding of an individual's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, facilitate an individual's coping and social and identity exploration or development, are sexual orientation / neutral or gender or identity / neutral, including interventions to prevent or address unlawful conduct or unsafe sex practices, and do not attempt or purport to impose change of an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity. And it goes on from there. But it's talking about attractions towards the same sex. You shall not, you can't do it. So it's not this, you can't say anything about anything to anyone.
Right.
It seems to be a one-way street.
It is. I mean, and that's an interesting point, again, in light of First Amendment law. So I believe that this is a violation of the free speech rights of therapists and clients. But that question has been litigated a little bit so far. The Ninth Circuit in California, as well as in the Third or Fourth Circuit in New Jersey. Because those states had counseling bans early on, 2012, 2013. Remember, Governor Chris Christie signed the one in New Jersey in 2013. Those have been litigated and have found to be, at least in California, they call it less professional speech, right? It's professional. Yes, they're just talking, but it's professional speech because he's a licensed therapist, so we can regulate it. And yeah.
What level? Circuit Court?
Circuit Court of Appeals for both, I believe. So, just shy of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court denied cert, so they didn't take up the appeal. Now that's bad, period. However, last summer, we had a change in the makeup of the court, not just swapping out one, Scalia for Gorsuch, but Kennedy retires, replaced by Kavanaugh. But the decision came out in a case called NIFLA, which had nothing to do with the counseling ban. It was the National Institute for Life or something. It's a pro-life pregnancy resource center organization that was suing California. This is another free speech issue. So the state of California wanted to tell pro-life pregnancy resource centers, to do ultrasounds and help women if they're going to have a baby that's unplanned pregnancy, gives them other options besides abortion. They're going to require them to essentially post, you have a right to abortion, you have a right to have abortion paid for, here's where you get an abortion, that type of stuff. Kind of compelled speech in their facilities. And they sued because they didn't want to do that for obvious reasons. And they won the NIFLA case. And California had used some of the same reasoning from that Ninth Circuit on this issue of professional speech and said, hey, we can essentially regulate what their announcements are because it's professional speech. And Justice Thomas, writing for a 5-4 majority, said this past summer, we've never recognized that category of professional speech that doesn't get protected. And then specifically called out the two cases on the counseling ban. I was going to deep in the weeds, I'm kind of geeking out legally here, but that the two cases on the West Coast and East Coast on counseling bans that we had lost were essentially wrongly decided on this professional speech category, which doesn't exist, which is unusual for him to mention other cases and kind of kick them in the shins like that. So I see that as doing a lot of law. He's essentially inviting appeal on this issue. And Kennedy's gone now. He was the swing vote on all this stuff, and he kept swinging in the wrong direction. So we're very hopeful that the Supreme Court will take up this issue. We'll get a good ruling on it. Because it is a violation of free speech. And to go all the way back to when you talked about that it's a one-way street, it's not even a content neutral. The law is, and because it's it's one thing to have, you can't talk about this subject, but to say you can't talk about this side of the subject, that now requires even greater scrutiny. You get that, it's almost impossible for the state to justify that. So we're going to pray about it. There are people in Massachusetts who are affected by this law that want to seek legal redress. We intend to help them. We'll keep everyone posted. moves forward. But there's cases now in Florida, New York, Maryland, and they're trying to reopen the cases in New Jersey and California. And if they don't get them reopened, they'll probably file new ones. So this is going to work its way up to the Supreme Court. It'll be very interesting to see, because it's a pure, First Amendment speech issue as well. Can they regulate free speech? And what they were trying to do in California, so California passed this law in 2012. They tried to pass essentially phase 2 last year. And what that would have done is, instead of it just being licensed professionals and minors that are prohibited, be anybody, as long as there's money changes hands. So licensed or unlicensed, with any type of client. So not even just kids now, even adults. And it was so broad that some attorneys, and they debated this, but some attorneys looked at it and said, well, look, if I'm a Christian bookstore and someone comes and says, hey, I'm looking for a book to kind of, help me resolve this unwanted same-sex attraction. Now, I don't know how many bookstore people come in and ask that question, but theoretically, if they come in and ask for something, and there's books, or even if there's books in the bookstore that say, how to pray your way to sexuality or whatever, those would be banned. If someone said, well, look, why don't you read through God's word, pray through the Psalms, and Jesus can heal you. Now all of a sudden, that the Bible is against the law.
So my freedom of conscience is now illegal?
In what sense is the?
Well, if I want to do that, why can't I?
Right. Well, so there's the freedom of speech issue, and then the free expression of religion. Right. As Christians, we are called to evangelize. So yeah, I think it's if this doesn't get resolved quickly in the courts, there's just going to have to be some kind of civil resistance or civil disobedience. And just look, we're going to get our kids the help that they need. We're not going to turn them over to the medical industrial complex, to be pumped full of hormones, given surgeries that require lifelong drugs to keep the wounds that simulate an artificial genitalia from healing, and be permanently sterilized. We're not going to do it. We're going to get them the help they need, and if that means we get taken to court, I'm going to take it. Yes, ma'am.
Has anyone thought of suing one of the doctors who does this work?
Yes, yeah, great question. So I think what needs to happen is, in 5 years or 10 years, when some of these kids who have been basically mutilated realize this was a big mistake, they need to sue Boston Children's Hospital and their gender clinic.
Yes.
Get a 7-figure settlement. Yeah, all the hospitals have gender clinics now. Everyone's on board with this stuff. Everyone is pushing it. I mean, again, that a 15-year-old girl can announce that she's a boy, and 2 weeks later being told she needs to be put on testosterone. So it's, at some point you need like a 7-8 figure settlement, and then the money will go up. The year will go down the balloon, but it's going to be a lot of damage between now and then. We just want to get Jim on the back. Yes, sir.
From your knowledge of the medical industry,
Which is very little, but yeah.
okay, but aside from committed Christians and maybe conservative Jews and some Muslims,
Right.
Is it everybody agrees? A quarter of the people totally agree, and the other 50% are just going along because they got, don't rock the boat.
That's probably about right. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but anecdotally, from what I've heard and read, a lot of people, certainly on the gender identity issue, have concerns. They don't want to say anything. They're terrified. If you object at all, you can lose your career, lose your job. So, part of my job is to be like in that tale of the Emperor's New Clothes. The kid in the street saying, "Hey, he's naked."
Yeah.
But we need more people to shout that. And it only worked because everyone started saying, I'll get you in there.
Okay. Going on the tail of that one about people being afraid.
Yeah.
What are we going to do or help the parents who their child comes home from school and says, I think she's a girl, she says, I think I'm a boy.
Yeah.
Now they can't go to counseling, so the parents are going to try their best to talk therapy
Right.
and help out. Now the child goes back to school my parents don't want any part of this change that I know, I feel, and now.
Yeah.
Does DCF get involved?
At some point, yes. I mean, that's the way things are being shaped right now. At the sort of the narratives I'm seeing. Even this, there was a school policy up in Westford 8 months ago. I went to school meeting there, and new transgender policy, and parents were concerned about the bathroom issue. What they were really upset about was the language that said, we're not, if the parents aren't supportive, if they are highly rejecting. So again, sort of trigger language I've seen elsewhere. Highly rejecting parents, then school officials should not disclose any of this to them. In other words, your son can go to the school, put his backpack in the locker, take out a mini skirt and high heels, and you'll be none the wiser. And if you are, deemed a highly rejecting family, that at some point you become an unsafe place for that child, and yes, DCF gets involved. And I think they know that's a bridge too far at this point, but we're going that direction. Yes, and then you.
That's what I did, have a question about, with the DCF thing.
Yeah.
That's the part of the problem is that they are allowed to step in whether you've been in court or not,
Right.
because they're, they have all the, what are they, monitors, or what do they call them?
Mandatory reporting.
Yeah, mandatory reporters, and the school's in on this. So
Yeah.
while stuff could be taking place, and you don't even know if your kid's at school, and they'll be taken right from school.
Yeah.
And then you can't get them to court, and even if you go to court and you're in all the litigation, it takes a while, and meanwhile, they're in the custody of the state, and they're being held in foster care, bounced all over, and they're allowed to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So it almost seems like when people say, what do? We don't have like the manpower, the physical power to go against these agencies, and the police are gonna enforce it because, they're enforcing, what's part of the law, the kid goes to school, blah, blah. So
Well, look, I mean,
it's almost like we need to form like a group, our own group of safety, like to go get our own kids, like before it's been decided in a court. It's crazy, but it almost seems like that's civil unrest or something. I mean, what's the answer?
Gotta accept the fact that public schools are hazardous environment.
Yeah, yes, we know that, but.
No, but I mean,
In the
2
meantime-
decades of indoctrination.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know how we got there. I just,
well,
what
if
is,
you,
like, now that we're here, what are we supposed to
I
do?
know.
if you can get your kids out of the public school, by all means. I mean, I know not everybody has the ability to do that.
Even
But-
then, it doesn't make a difference though, because if there was any breathing of this, if they even mentioned to anybody and somebody found out, it doesn't matter what school they're in.
One of the families I'm talking to, trying to help, is a homeschool family, and their kids still into this stuff. A large part of that, from what I'm told, is that the kid was involved on social media. So Instagram, which I don't know if Instagram is inherently bad, but Snapchat, which is inherently bad. I mean, does anyone know who found Snapchat?
No.
So there's a college kid out in Stanford who sent an image to a young lady that he had been involved with the night before, probably after having imbibed some adult beverages, and was like, man, I wish I could make that picture go away. So his roommate, who was a techie, created Snapchat. So that's sort of the basis of Snapchat, right? Because Snapchat is you send an image or a message, and after it's read, it just kind of, this message will self-destruct, it evaporates. Now everything is there's no like permanent erasure. It's out there in the ether somewhere, and you can take a screenshot of it. But these are very popular social media platforms that kids are on all the time. And I've from reading and then talking to another mom who testified at the hearing, her kids, it was Instagram and Tumblr, again, social media stuff, watching a lot of YouTube videos, and they just kind of get sucked into this whole ethos. So if you have kids or grandkids, get them off the screens, like period, and certainly don't let them go on social media and monitor the interactions they have, because it used to be just to worry about what comes in on the TV. We could unplug that. Now, I mean, there's just so many pipelines into your home. But having an attorney, I guess I'm kind of biased as a profession, having an attorney, an experienced family law attorney, who gets in on the ground floor in these situations is extraordinarily helpful. It's probably the best thing we can do defensively So one of my dreams is to really network with experienced family law attorneys, make sure they're, keyed into what's going on here and kind of have them on speed dial. I've got a couple that I've worked with, including situation right now, and I've seen how that can really help resolve things, right? Because to some extent, things are, if DCF can come and kind of throw their weight around, they will. But if you give them some resistance right away with the attorney, it helps. So, yeah.
One more
I'm sorry,
question.
I promised. Yeah.
One more question.
A couple of questions. One is the age of the child having anything to do with any of this legislation? And is there younger than and older than?
Under 18, that's it, man.
Oh, under 18, so it could be a 5-year-old in kindergarten. And the other thing is that I wonder how well educated both adults and the children are as to what is entailed in the process itself, physically, medically, to change their gender.
Yeah. I think kids are learning about it in public schools at a very young age, but they're.
Yeah, but are they learning the real facts?
No.
That's not my
Of
point.
course not.
Does the parent have any, knowledge of what it's going to, I would think, if I were a parent, my kid came home, I'd fight like the blazes, just knowing what was physically going to be done to this child.
Well, that's how we're able to help that. But I'll close this. That's how we're able to help that one mom here in Massachusetts who was fighting for custody of her daughter over that puberty block. So we had a pediatric endocrinologist connected her with, who submitted testimony in court on what these drugs do and how they're not tested for this, and not approved for this, and how cause sterility and they're carcinogenic and all this stuff, which refuted the other side's testimony that it's medically necessary. We think all their problems go away. Look, if anyone wants to get our e-alerts and be up to date on stuff, if you don't already get them, you can send me an email, andrew@mafamily.org, andrew@mafamily.org, or just text the word alliance, ALLIANCE, to 797979. Alliance to 797979. Say again?
Andrew
At MA, as in Massachusetts, mafamily.org. Our website is mafamily.org. And thanks for having me.
Thanks to you.